What up? Okay. Today is June 23rd. We're still on this book that I don't understand. So, let me get the clock ready. Yup. Put 10 minutes on the dial. Oh. What is this? I don't even know why things happen the way it does sometimes. Okay, so we're starting on page 173. 173. Okay. Then, with an outburst of snarling, barking, and growling, threw himself upon King Chop's fan, shook it savagely until the richly painted covering was torn in shreds and lay scattered about, tossed it up in the air, only to leap upon it with all fours as it touched the floor, and then, setting his stout claws in its joints, wrenched them asunder as if they were made of paper. But this was not at all. To complete the list of indignities which he had visited upon King Chop's property, he now turned his back toward that grave magistrate, and by several sudden and vigorous kicks with his hind feet sent the sticks in a shower flying so close to his head that one actually struck against the huge disc of glass placed in front of King Chop's right eye. But a court officer, who had fallen sound asleep and let his head fall backwards, did not escape so luckily. Two of the largest sticks entered his nostrils and remained sticking there like arrows in a target. The man awoke with an ear-piercing shriek. In spite of the commands of the court officers that everyone who laughed should be bastinadoed, there was suppressed giggling here and there. King Chop himself twisted his face into the most comical grimaces in order to keep from bursting out into a fit of laughter. As for Bulger, he was beside himself with pleasure. In fact, he fairly howled with joy. King Chop now moved his thumb as a sign that he was about to speak, and a deep silence fell upon the multitude. I was summoned to approach the steps of the judge's chair. He spake as follows: When thou art taller, thou wilt be stronger. When thou art older, thou wilt be wiser. Know then that as the abject slave of the child of the sun, him of the sacred continents, lord of all the orders, I had intended to dismiss this charge against thy dog, cast off his manacles, and set him free, but it may not now be done. Thy pleading hath convinced me that he doth deserve to die. A just cause needeth no other defense than words, but thou hast pleaded with hands and legs and feet. Thou hast been over-earnest. 'Tis proof thou knewest the weakness of thy cause. Hadst thou not spoken at all, and had thy dog himself but oped his mouth at the very outset, what had fallen therefrom would have freed him from his shackles. Now he must die. Let him be delivered to the public executioner. And then, with a motion of his hand, he ordered the gongs to beat, so that it was impossible for me to make reply. The great chamber was now the scene of the wildest hubbub. The guards crowded around me as if they feared I might, in my desperation, sacrifice my life in attempting to rescue Bulger. Poor Bulger. He had been quickly lifted into his wicker cage and borne out of a courtroom. Although I could feel my heart hammering on my ribs, I gave no sign of the storm of my emotion that was sweeping over my inward being. I could hear those terrible words, public executioner, ringing in my ears, but my infallible second sight caught no glimpse of that dreadful officer, and hence I felt that there was still hope. But I moved neither hand nor foot. The gongs ceased beating. The throng departed from the Hall of Justice. The guards, kowtowing, backed out of my presence. I stood there alone in that vast, silent chamber. I was aroused at last from my deep reverie by the approach of a messenger from Keenchop. He thus addressed me. The wretched little misshapen Keenchop humbly begs the tall and stately stranger to drink tea with him in his private apartment. Mechanically I followed the judge's servant, who led me through long and winding corridors. Keenchop had laid off his huge spectacles and received me most graciously. All the servants were dismissed. We sipped our tea in silence for a while. At length, rising and stepping behind a screen, he returned bearing a huge volume. It was the record of Bulger's trial. He desired me to examine it while he refreshed himself after his long sitting on the judge's bench with a short nap. I turned the leaves of the record over slowly. Not only were my words set down with the most perfect accuracy, but correct drawings of the various scenes filled the broad margins of the record. On the last page, I noticed that a blank space had been left between the words must and die and him and be delivered. "'Tis miraculous," exclaimed Keenchop, starting up and rubbing his eyes. "What a wonderful creature is thy dog." As I slept, I dreamt that he opened his mouth, and what fell therefrom convinced me of his innocence. "Let him be brought into your august presence, O just judge," I replied. In a few moments, Bulger's wicker house was deposited on the floor, and he gently lifted out of it. I could only with the greatest exertion keep back the tears as his large, speaking eyes were turned full upon me, as if to ask, "When will all this mystery come to an end, little master?" I stroked his head with a loving hand to assure him that all was right. No sooner were their attendants out of the apartment than, taking the purse of gold which Bulger had picked up on the beach and restored to me, I placed it in his mouth and made a sign for him to carry it to Keenchop, who had now resumed his huge spectacles and sat poring over the pages of the record of Bulger's trial. Bulger did not wait for a second bidding. Making straight for Keenchop, he raised himself on his hind feet and dropped the purse in that dignitary's lap. "'Tis wonderful, 'tis very wonderful," cried Keenchop, testing the weight of the purse with a pleased expression of countenance, first in one hand and then in the other. "Thy speech was silvern, but his silence is golden." Didn't even look in the camera. "'Twere a crime to part two such faithful hearts. Go in peace." But the record of the trial, I asked. Keenchop spoke not, but turning to the last page, he laid his finger on the place where the blank spaces had been left. They were now both filled. The word "not" had been written in each of them. The guards were now summoned, and in a few moments the shackles were loosened from Bulger's feet. Upon finding himself free once more, he leapt into my lap with a wild cry of joy and covered my hands and face with caresses. I could not keep the tears back. Clasping the faithful animal convulsively in my arms, I wept like a child. But a cloud came over our joy, for King Chop, upon my request for a safe conduct to the nearest seaport, informed me that he was powerless to grant my request, that I must apply to Slim Lim, the Dao Tai, or imperial governor of the province, lord of the peacock feather, knight of the plain red tail button, knight of the plain red button, etc., etc. "'Tis well," I exclaimed. "Deign to send one of thy servants to conduct me into the presence of his honor, the Dao Dai. I pine to set foot once more on my native strand. I long to keep an end to the sorrowful anxiety of my parents. I long to put an end to the sorrowful anxiety of my parents." King Chop shook his head and smiled sadly. No, O honored guest," said he, "that no one may approach the Dao Dai, lord of the peacock feather, unless in answer to most humble petition of 20 pages length, his high and mighty lordship deign to accord an audience. To attempt to do otherwise might mean death at the hands of the guards, but would most surely mean imprisonment in the deepest dungeon of the imperial fortress." Okay, well, we will... The heck? So we'll start there. Excuse me. 173 is where we started. Didn't get very far at all. Okay. Quit procrastinating on anything and everything. Time wasted is just that, wasted. Avoid distractions and the noise around me. Block it out. The art of continuous self-love through food, through water intake, through intentional meditation and thought. Something inside of me is superior to circumstance. Is it kind? Is it true? Does it reflect my authentic self? Focus more on money and its education. Focus more on self-discipline. See the sun, honor the moon. Forward momentum. The path out of hell is through misery. Honor thy journey. We are slaves to our own incessant urges to escape the present moment. Meditate, walk, journal, stretch, love animals. Leave life to wander all it needs. Less stress, more fairy tale. Work on bettering the love I show my body through the food and beverage I put in it. With money, it's not what you make, but what you keep. Focus. Lose any ties to victim mentality. Continue to help yourself. I'm tired. I've been very stressed lately. And a lot going on. It's like I can't get enough sleep. Okay. Till tomorrow, muchachos.